Player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Thancred review. Yes, it's a character I've never had a chance to review before because he was one of the first units ever released in the game, and although they've given him some updates over the years, they were never really worth their salt. But now we actually have something to really talk about with this unit, so I wanted to give him at least 25 minutes of my time to analyze him a bit for you all. So today's character review, all the standard things, the character overview, we'll look at his stats that have now been tweaked and upgraded, the report card, the general thoughts, then we'll look at the abilities that have now been updated, some general optimization pieces. You know the drill by now. So kicking things off with the character overview, he's a light unit that has been upgraded over time. He is being given out for free. You technically should have gotten him yesterday, I believe, for the first time, and they've given out some extra shards and mind spheres to help build him. They do have the unique main job of Gunbreaker for this unit, as well as Dragoon and Red Mage subjobs. He does equip only one weapon in the entire game. It is the Lion Heart replica, but he does belong to the Sword Knight category for a vision card perspective. He does equip hats, cloths, and accessories, despite the fact that he is kind of a tank nowadays, or at least seemingly intended to be. Doesn't equip those heavier armors that you might be used to. He does have a move of 3, jump of 1 as a 100 cost unit, and my faith stat recommendation is 30. You obviously could run him at 50, there's nothing wrong with that. But none of his buffs really rely on that 50 faith to make his abilities activate, and unless you're receiving a lot of external healing, almost all of his internal healing is percentage based and pretty self-contained, so that 30% faith will reduce the amount of ailments you're afflicted by from a status ailment perspective. It'll also reduce the magic damage that you take, which is good for him. Now, his job has a max range of 5 squares away on its targeting radius. He does have 2 AoEs and 2 single target abilities, and comes with some interesting resistances here that you just don't see modern units released with. A fair amount of very strong double digits, 35% to strike, 20% to slash and missile, the 5% to pierce, and the negative 15% to magic, which is one of the tweaks they made. He used to be, I think, negative 30%. It was a lot worse. Now, while he might look at face value like he's not great against magic, there are other things in his kit that actually make it so that he is. And you can always still bring that negative 15% closer to 0, which is absolutely recommended. But from an ailment perspective as well here, 50% to paralyze and 50% to immobilize, with the negative 5% to charm. So he's got a propensity to be charmed if you throw that ailment his way, but only coming in with 2 of the other positives. Overall, not the end of the world. I think the immobilize one obviously is very trendy at the moment because of how prevalent Shreka is within the game. But his mastery ability, to continue on here, there's a lot of stat upgrades, and a lot of this is just adjusting for the power creep coming from year 1. And they've given him 30% HP, 10 slash attack, 150 just flat attack total. They did increase his agility by 10%. That was something that absolutely was behind the times. He also gets 30% AoE res penetration and 10 accuracy as well. And the newest Dream ability gives him 25 accuracy, 25 debuff weakening, and 15 crit evasion as well. All of these things really noteworthy stats to kind of gap close him to the current units that are being released. Now, from a base stat perspective, they did change his base stats, and I've actually had to amend my HP chart here at the top left to account for the fact that he's now currently in Global the highest base HP of any unit. He will be supplanted by the new hero Mont in a couple of weeks, but still, Thancred is on absolutely a different level of base HP innately. He does have a generous amount of attack at the 403. It's not incredible, it's not awful. The dexterity does run a smidge higher at the 240, but not necessarily known for a lot of critical hit rates. He doesn't have a lot of things that you might typically need to bump up the total crit rate. We'll see that in a couple slides. And the base luck is not bad at 194 either. So overall, I mean, this is roughly in line with where all these 5th gen units are for base stats. That's not the end of the story, though. There are some things that still hold him back, so don't get too excited quite yet. From the total stat analysis, he's literally an outlier in my HP bar here. I literally don't even count him as part of the statistical metrics. That's how good he is, but he does get a fair amount of extra attack overall, a lot of that from the mastery ability, where they give him the extra 150 attack. The rest of the stats are okay. They really kind of falls behind once you look at the board stats here, where 24 dexterity on the board and 47 luck on the board, very low compared to what most units get. So while the base stats are in a really good spot. They never really adjusted these board stats here, so net effect is that he's still okay in those regards. Now, we get to the agility. This is one of those things that they gave him an extra 10% on the mastery because it was absolutely necessary, and he's still pretty slow by current standards. He's at about 80 agility with the vision cards equipped in the main and sub slots, and he's got no passives to increase that agility, so he's basically locked in there, which on the one hand, as a tank-oriented unit now, 80 agility is not the end of the world. Slower turns means you can let your buffs last a little bit longer because you're not going through your turns as quickly. And fortunately, he's got no teammate buffs in the kit, so he's not really reliant on overall turn rotation either. So not the end of the world for him to be this low in terms of total agility, but it is something that absolutely stands out from where most modern units are. Now for the other stats, that innate critical hit rate, he's got no board nodes that increase it, no passives that increase it. Although the base dexterity is good, the total dexterity is average, not really known for it. The crit avoidance rate, though, he does get a small bump from that dream upgrade where he gets the extra 15%. So yeah, critical avoidance rate skews a little bit higher. And in practice, it'll actually be a lot higher because he has a sequence ability that increases crit evade as well as the aura effect. Total accuracy, they gave him a ton of accuracy in this upgrade. It's in a really good spot. It's not top tier. He's still going to need some help to really hit these high-end evade units without relying on his guaranteed hit, which he does have access to. But overall, coming in about a 200% innate total accuracy is in a pretty good spot, but there's no passives to increase that. So when you include all the characters that equip passives, he does kind of fall behind. And the luck scaling equips, he absolutely is not an evade unit. This is something that's absolutely power crept him. He's not even a pseudo evade unit in any capacity whatsoever. Which brings us to the overall report card. Now, the effective HP is absolutely an S. He's actually at the top of my charts for like the hybrid of tank and DPS. That being said, effective HP means less nowadays. It's really more about your survivability, which also is very good. You know, he's got 12 defense. He's got the 15 AoE wide res of both types, 20 unit resistance innately. He's got those huge anti-pierce, anti-strike, and anti-missile upsides, as we kind of alluded to. He's got the Protect 2.0 on his first buff, a heal back, some all-element resistance, 50% general barrier, a 30% reduced magical damage, part of his aura, and the 30% crit evade and the 40 chain res, all part of the aura that does affect himself. Really strong attributes, and he does have an absorb capability on his 120 ability that will also increase enemy unit resistance penetration, which helps his survivability, as well as the innate 25% debuff weakening. So he's littered with all of these stats that we like to see to absolutely perform as a tank as intended. The damage for me is a B+. He's got some good penetrations. They're okay. 40 defense pen, 40 slash pen. He can get up to 60 AoE resistance penetration after his buff. He's got a 30% defense break on the 120. It does obviously depend on a lot of other factors. So what Esper are you using? Do you have human killer mods, or did you go for a tankier Esper? What kind of vision card support do you have for other kinds of slash resistance penetration? Because right now where it stands, it's fine, but it's really going to be variable on how you decide to end up building him. Now, agility is a C-. We talked about how he's a little bit behind the curve. They gave him some agility, but really not enough to be competitive with the modern units, but still, I don't think it's a game breaker for him in terms of how you're supposed to play him. The accuracy for me is a B+, absolutely above average, good innate accuracy. You will need a lot of help, though, building that accuracy rate higher, which there are options, but he does have a great guaranteed hit in his main kit, though, just for general accuracy purposes. The evasion's a C, no real evade capability. The movement is a B+. He does have a jump +1 passive. That is a nice option for depending on the Guild War map or the arena map. And he's got a buff on his Dragoon sub for move and jump +1, so there are some movement options in there. Now, the auto ease of use for me is a B+. The AI is exceptionally straightforward for the most part. We'll talk about that on the next slide. You might have just a little bit of difficulty deciding on how tanky you want to make him versus how DPS oriented you want to make him, and what team synergy ideally works. We'll talk about the team synergies toward the end, but for an average player, that might be a little outside the box to think about, so the auto ease of use may not be super easy, but it's not bad. The AI at least, but it's not bad. Game disruption for me is a B. He's a solid unit that can absolutely play in the meta, but I don't think he's a meta-defining unit. So he's got a lot of great value, but there's enough deficiencies that I think his leash is a little bit shorter. But still, 2 thumbs up. The passives I love, the counter I love. The overall job and kit for me is a B. I think the aura is amazing. The abilities are okay, but I just don't think they're 5th gen level. We'll talk about them more soon. For the final grade of a B+, he's absolutely a solid unit that's going to appreciate reincarnations. That's true for all units, but Thancred in particular, because he does have some of these overall stat deficiencies, you want to make up for them in other ways, and given that he's free for most, and for veterans, you can likely build him even easier. This is kind of a no-brainer. He's a great and very versatile unit, an absolutely top-tier Sword Knight candidate, and a huge bolster to the light element. I think I'm selling him a little bit short with the B+ here, because I think in the short term, like right now, if you're using him today, he is very, very good. He will surprise you. But I just know that as the game continues to evolve right now, and seeing what the bar is with the new hero King Mont, and it looks like they're implementing all these new ability interactions, Thancred's a little vanilla, all things considered. So while he does have some really good upside at the moment, I just don't know how long that'll end up lasting. Now for the general thoughts, yeah, they gave him some big upgrades, an enormous HP, a significant teammate aura, legit statistical upgrades, the accuracy, the crit evade, the agility, and his hate passive, which we'll talk about soon, can define his role better, which I do think is a good thing. But there are still deficiencies. There's no limit break, and the game has evolved that these are significant power creep factors to most of these characters, that the limit break can easily win or lose you almost all of your fights. The fact that he doesn't have that at all is already a step back. I do think his attack targeting patterns are slightly limiting as well. They're all range height 1, a couple of them are rather narrow, there's no real select 2 or anything for targeting patterns, so as a tank, not the end of the world, but not amazing either. He is still behind, though, on certain stats. The crit rate, the evade, the agility, all of those are absolutely still behind. And I do think that the Gunbreaker AI is still a little bit of a mess, but only really when you consider the sub-job buffs. And we'll talk about this more in the ability section, but he has 2 self-buffs on the main job that are absolutely top tier, and you must use them all the time. The problem is that the second buff is a lower priority to him than what's available on his sub-jobs. So if you have these sub-jobs on and you have those buffs enabled, there's a chance that he might not get to his other main job second buff that he absolutely needs to. It's kind of a mess. I'll talk about it more in a bit, but I wish they changed it in the ability upgrade. The damage is good, but will obviously be variable as we mentioned, but super well-rounded against all damage types at this point. Versus Missile, he's got 35% resistance with his passive. The 40 chain res on the aura helps with those multi-hit units. The 4-hit barrier obviously can live through a chain or two. The crit evade on the aura certainly helps with these high crit damage units as well. For Pierce, he's got the 5% innate, but his hate passive that you'll equip gives him another 15%. 20% Pierce res is nothing to sneeze at. That's a great starting spot. 35% versus Strike. Although he's got the negative to magic, he does have a general barrier, which will apply to magic damage. He's got the 30% magic reduction on his aura. He does have a passive that can give him 15% magic res and 12 spirit, which will bring him to 0. And he does have a magic reflex as the counter. And because I do like him as a 30 faith unit, you're not going to take as much magic damage in general. So although at first glance it might seem like he's weak to it, he's actually relatively decent against it. He's also great in the follow-up meta here, where he's got that 20 unit res innately, and his level 120 ability increases the enemy unit resistance penetration, which decreases their follow-up damage. That, in conjunction with his crit evade aura, means that you're not going to take as much damage from those follow-up attacks because you're not going to be critically hit by them as often. And absolutely a strong Sword Knight addition for Rainbow play. Now, should you build him? My answer is yes, he's a free unit. Veterans likely already have him and or the shards to build. There's lots of shard opportunities too for people trying to catch up here at the moment. I don't know if it's a huge investment to say if you don't have him at all right now, is he worth max reincarnating or building to 140? A little more debatable, definitely not max reincarnating, that's for sure. If you're getting him for the first time, you are starting a little bit behind, but the light element has always been a relatively safe investment. He's good for the element wheel because of that, where there's no real counter element-wise other than dark. Good rainbow play opportunities for him too as a tank, where tanks are very easy to put in a variety of teams to still do their job. And he's a great Swiss Army knife player against various metas, which we just talked through. So there's a lot of versatility here for this unit. A lot of opportunities that I do think he's a good addition to your account. And even at the top end of the game, he's competitive. Now, getting into the intricacies of the job, to me, Camouflage 2 is always going to be on, no questions asked. You will never have this turned off. It's all of his survival mechanics, it's all of his penetrations. I can't speak highly enough about how good this Camouflage 2 passive is. Now, the second passive, I would tend to have Nebula on. That's the one that gives him the 7 hate, which does make him a tank in that regard. He can't replenish that hate at any point, but this is also really important, not only for the Pierce res, which we mentioned, which is kind of niche, but the 40% reaction block rate. He has none of it anywhere in his kit. So getting this here is a very valuable 40% that Slash units really need to have to optimally function. That being said, Jump +1, certainly viable depending upon the map you're on, and even Dragoon lore, I like this for the healing power and the HP, just because his HP is already so high, and that healing power obviously is great for some of that sustain. I think Mage's Protection you could entertain if you really are trying to fine-tune him to be an anti-magic unit, but obviously you lose the 7 hate when you do so, so a little bit of a trade-off. Now for the counter abilities, I'm putting on Magic Reflex 100% of the time. This is too good to not have on. For the main job buffs, this is where, both these buffs are exceptional. The second buff down here, and this is in order of the priority, he'll use No Mercy first, but you absolutely must have Super Belide active in this fight. That is where you get that incredibly great aura, as well as the 4-time General Barrier and some AP savings for him. Only 2 usages for each buff, but the problem is here that Super Belide is a lower priority than his sub-job buffs that we'll look at in just a second after the offensive abilities. We'll kind of go back to that, but the main job offensive, he's got 4 slash-oriented types, and yeah, there's a couple like AoE scaling. They're rather condensed, rather small. The targeting pattern is limited to the range height of 1. He's got some decent utility here. He's got the Dispel Courage on one of these. This decreased evasion rate will proc if the enemy has agility % up active at the moment. So this is why you do want to get him to a modicum level of accuracy, not just relying on that guaranteed hit down below here, because you do want to be able to get a cheeky hit on an evade unit once, just so you can make sure that if they have agility % up, you can reduce that evasion rate by 30, which Riku has a buff for agility % up. So if she's going to Venera and buffing her, they both should have agility % up, so this would apply to them and help reduce their evasion rate rather materially. Now, Rough Divide is the guaranteed hit. I like this one because it is a shift ability as well, so it really does close the gap where, even if he's a little bit slower and doesn't get as many turns, this ability will still allow him to position himself in a really good spot on the battlefield. It also does increase his agility, so you get some compounding effects, and 60 crit evade for 1 turn obviously helps his survivability a lot too. Finally, Blasting Zone is one you'll also use pretty often. It's a defense break, it's the absorption of the damage, and it's the increase of the enemy unit res pen. Now we look at the limit break. There's none. I'm sorry, guys. I really wish I had something here to talk about. I really do think this is a missed opportunity, given the upgrade that they've given him. There's, at this point, like no units in the game that are at a UR level, particularly a 100 cost level, that don't have a limit break. I think this was a big swing and a miss. But for the sub job here, the Gunbreaker, this is conceptually a fun one. I mean, Burst Strike is one of the higher mods, considering it's 16 AP when you compare this to the Keen Edge, which is 17 AP. I mean, I like that. I think this is superior in that regard. These 2 buffs, though, this is part of the problem. These buffs have higher priority than Super Belide does. So if you have the Gunbreaker job on, you're going to unfortunately have to turn these off unless you can absolutely guarantee that you can get 3 buffs off. And even then, he will cast both of these before Super Belide. So you really can't have both of them on. You would have to pick or choose one or the other. And if he has the hate active for himself, he will prefer to use these on himself, not an ally. So if he's got the hate active, he'll give himself regen, he'll then give himself 25 defense, he'll then use Super Belide. You can see the problem there. So you have to be careful about the ability toggles when it comes to the Gunbreaker subjob. But the same is true for the Dragoon. He will opt to use Dragon's Kin before he uses Super Belide. So you might have to turn this off depending upon how long your battlefield is. This is still a really good buff. I just don't think it's better than Super Belide. You absolutely need that aura to be active. And honestly, the rest of the stuff in this kit is kind of a meme. There's no cast time down. And so these Dragoon abilities, he'll be in the air for a pretty long time, which on the one hand, actually isn't all that bad, where he can evade some damage for a turn or 2. On the other hand, by jumping in the air for an extended period of time, you leave your teammates open to being hit instead, which is kind of the antithesis of what you want your tank to be. So this is kind of a meme. It's probably more for manual-related stuff, but it's whatever. Which brings us to the Red Mage subjob, which I think I'm likely using this one just for the resistance break. Now, here's the thing. This scales off of his magic stat, not his attack stat. But I just can't get over the fact that it's the Dispel Re-Raise here as well. I think this is such a great potential piece of utility that, it's going to depend on the amount of damage he actually does with it, whether or not the AI will prioritize it. But one of the things with the AI is that if an enemy has Re-Raise active and you can kill them, you will prefer to use that ability so that you can remove the re-raise. I think that's a cool thing to have in your back pocket. It's obviously not going to do a lot of damage, but in that rare instance where you're against an enemy with re-raise active and they're at like 100 HP, he can use this and kill them most likely and take off that re-raise. So I do like that component. Other than that, I'm just sticking with Gunbreaker and turning both of these buffs off and just having Burst Strike as an additional type of attack type. Now for the TMR, this TMR was great for like mono light metas for the 15% light resistance. It hasn't aged as well. I'm not equipping it ever anymore. I guess it's nice to have and certainly can be useful if we see that uptick in mono light, which we might in the short term here. There's a lot of great mono light units out there, but TMRs have evolved and this one has not aged with it. Now for the job-based vision cards, the thing about Sword Knight, I can't say there's any slam dunk synergies with any of these classes. I usually have two different arrows down here. One of them has a color in it and one of them is empty with the white. And the one with the color is meant to really hammer home the best synergy. And this one's like, kind of, sort of. To me, there's a lot of good synergies, but they're all kind of, sort of. All of these classes do share some main slot oriented vision cards. So you absolutely can team build with all of these 5, but it's a little limited. And a lot of these cards are limited. And so Sword Knight as a class has always been a little bit limited. That being said, that actually bodes still well for Thancred, who as a tank is a great rainbow unit and genuinely doesn't need as much of the vision card support as some of your average damage dealers do. So from that regard, I still think he's a great play into these 5 different categories. Sword Warrior has a lot of great offensive synergies. Gloves, they've gotten some more attention lately. I think Fists with the Riku vision card has made him a compelling play with the Dagger class, which we'll see in a second. I do still think Book is still one of the better synergies, despite the fact there's not many Book units, but Summer Resnick I think is a solid play. And Staff Black Mage, there's enough here, but again, it's a little bit limited for what you have for vision card options. When we get to the unique equipment, he's got 2 different ones here. One of them is the only weapon he can equip in the game. It's the Lionheart Replica. It's honestly a very good weapon. A lot of great mods. I personally am building the accuracy build for this weapon. I think that number is too material to pass up. The Bale Gauntlet, honestly, is another great one for him. I can't say it's best in slot. I think I would prefer to have just an Alexandrite ring there most of the time, but this is a super compelling second option. Honestly, I might build this, and if I did, I would also build the accuracy build. But when we get to the general optimization, you do have a slew of other equipment options. It's really just matchup dependent. The thing with Winter Coat and Black Garb, although those are evade-oriented ones, they do have non-evade builds that I do still like. I do still think things like the all-element resistance on the Winter Coat is nice, as well as the light resistance. And the Black Garb actually has dark resistance on it with some defense pens. So even though he's not an evade unit, there are some attributes on here that aren't awful. I do still tend to prefer the Alexandrite ring, but even the Gauntlet of Sharp Steel or the Defense Bracer, if you're going for a super anti-missile, he absolutely can take advantage of that. And the Espers, for me, I think these top 4 are probably your best plays overall, because he's not a true tank. He really should do a modicum amount of damage. I think these bottom 3, the Jumbo Cactuar, Dark Siren, Dark Golem, obviously more for your tankier build of Thancred. I just don't know if that's ideal. And these bottom right light ones are more meme. Shinryu is fine. Obviously, it's a magic Esper, but it's got accuracy on it, and it's got reaction block on it, which I do like emphasizing for him. And Valfor is absolutely a meme Esper. This has the cast time down that if you're going for the Dragoon and want to play around with the light attack up and the dark res, it's there. This is literally a meme build, though. And then for the TMRs, I'm just sticking with agility-oriented TMRs. I just think he's too slow to not have some kind of agility-oriented TMR on him. Now, for my favorite teams, you got some fun options here. Obviously, a bunch of iterations of Mono Light are among the strongest plays. Cloud in particular is such a great partner for him, but you could go Lotus Mage Fina as the third or Yuna as the third. Totally different teams, but all of them super viable. I do like him as a tank for the Evade girls here as well, though. They do share the Riku vision card, and although the rest of the vision cards don't support him much, just the fact that he's there as a tank to provide them with that extra aura of the chain res, the magic reduction, all those things, his existence allows them to do their job effectively as well, knowing that they're not going to be targeted first. But the third class here is the more Sword Knight oriented team, where Ashen King Mont has still held up over time, and Summer Resnick as a book unit does have some really good synergies with them. So, could you use Lucille or Fina instead of Summer Resnick? Absolutely. I just think Summer Resnick offers more for the current meta and has a little more alignment with the vision cards. That being said, there are also some fun options in Sword Warrior that maybe not necessarily super competitive, but I don't think it's any coincidence that these are all light-oriented units, with the exception of Cypher, who actually is the exception that he is very competitive with Thancred. Cypher is by far the best unit of these icons on the right. But the rest of them, we're going to see Lucio get an MA3 sometime soon here. Some of you might be playing with Ramza, really enjoying him. Bartz is getting an MA3 here next week with Final Fantasy V. So there's some fun overlap here between the Sword Warrior and the Light Element for someone like Thancred. Now for the Truststones left side here, I'm going HP, likely the Luck build, quite honestly. I just don't want him missing if I can help it. Defense and Spirit are niche at this point. They're okay, but I'm usually just going HP or Luck. The right side, I absolutely think you just have to go Agility. I just don't think you can entertain any other Truststone set. And the 6 passives on the right side, I think this is kind of straightforward. I mean, the Lionheart replica already gives him the light attack, the slash attack, and the slash pen. So at this point, you're just going for attack 20%, the defense pen, the reaction block, the healing power. The dexterity of 15% will help his overall damage. It's in his formula. And I think the 10 accuracy here is certainly nice. That obviously depends if you're using the Alexandrite ring or not, because that accuracy 10 won't stack with the Alex ring, who has it in the box stat. But if that's the case, you can sub this out for crit rate or crit damage, whatever it may be. But that's a Thancred review overall. Again, this is a super solid unit. He absolutely can play at the top end of the game. He absolutely can thrive in a variety of metas. Is he a meta definer? I don't think so. Is he a solid addition to your account? I think so, absolutely yes. And did they do a good job upgrading him? Absolutely yes. I think they balanced it really well overall. I think people that are coming in from Final Fantasy XIV and building him are going to get some good value in the short term as a very casual player. But even as a theory crafter, I absolutely enjoy this unit because there's so many different ways you can play him, use him, build him, team build around him, that for people that like to really think about the game, he's an awesome unit to play around with. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. Per usual, comments, critiques, questions, criticisms, throw it all in the comment section below. I'm sure I misspoke or made a mistake, or you have a different opinion that you want some clarity on. Love to be able to chat with you guys in the comments, so please engage if you want to. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to y'all soon.